Imagine that, one ordinary day, you're doing some things in your kitchen, minding your own business, when suddenly you hear screams coming from the tenant's house under yours. A kind and dear man in the neighborhood. Worried that something has happened to him, you rush to help him. But before arriving, you find a young man with a head injury asking for help. You rescue him, and he tells you what your adorable neighbor, better known as Father Denke, tried to attack the boy with a pickaxe when he invited him to dinner at his house. The police arrive, and they cannot believe what the boy tells. Denke tried to convince them that it was in personal defense because the boy entered threw up, but the police put him in preventive prison to later find his house full of human remains. All this happened to a man from Kiev, Poland, at December 21st of 1924. Karl Denke was born in 1860 in the Kingdom of Prussia, now part of Poland. His childhood years were particularly dark, not in the sense of murder and bloodshed, but in the lack of what is known about Denke's youth. Karl Denke was the first of the modern serial killers, and he came long before the rise of Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. Karl grew up in a town of Poland, but at the age of 10, he was transferred to Münsterberg, where he studied. His teachers described him as a stubborn boy and without respect towards them. He got terrible grades, for which he was reprimanded, while his classmates considered him an idiot because of his learning difficulties and because he only learned to speak at the age of 6. He was said to be a soft-spoken but troublesome child. When he was 12, Karl ran away from home and worked as a gardener to support himself. At the age of 25, his situation began to improve once his father died and received part of the inheritance, with which he bought land to dedicate himself to agriculture. But it was bad for him, so he sold the property, and with the money obtained, he acquired a house in Siebisch. However, his savings disappeared due to the inflationary crisis of that time. So he rented the house, but did not move, and stayed in a small apartment of the same property. Those who knew him classified him as a lonely subject who they appreciated, since he was a calm and kind man. He actively participated in the religious life of the town, gave alms with relative frequency, and even invited homeless people to sleep in his house. For this, he earned the nickname Father Denke, which means Father Denke. As he was not known for any vice, the police gave him a salesman license, which he took advantage of to sell belts, suspenders, ribbons, shoelaces, and boneless pickled pork. Thanks to that, he managed to survive, but nobody knew where he got his products from, and since he was so calm, they never suspected that all the things he sold were made with human flesh and skin. Before they discovered what Karl was doing, he accepted for the first time an invitation to eat from his family, which gave a brief hint of his behavior, since he devoured 2 pounds of meat without qualms. So from that day, his older brother called him the glutton, without imagining what he was doing. Due to disgraced records and the man's behavior, everything indicates that he killed to feed himself and get money in the middle of the economic crisis. So he resorted to tramps at the train station, whom he invited home after gaining their trust, without them suspecting that they would end up as pickled in the market. Karl started killing when he was 39 years old. His first victim was 25-year-old Emma Sander in 1909, but his activity intensified in 1921 when he was 51 years old, because it was between that year and 1924 that Karl murdered the majority. This was discovered because he wrote down the names, dates of deaths, weight of the bodies, and other data of the sacrificed. Little by little, signs of Karl's behavior came to light, including the strong smell that emanated from his apartment, which his neighbors complained about. In addition, he always had a lot of meat, even when no one had money to buy it. At first, they suspected that Karl killed dogs to make the pickles, but no one tried to do anything because they liked Karl and did not give importance to the lives of dogs. They also didn't care about the blood, the waste bags he was throwing away, and the noise of his hammer, because they believed he was still killing dogs. Authorities made in-depth inquiries and found 15 pieces of bones and pieces of meat with a salt solution in the suspect's home. They also detected that there were no violent reactions from the victim, for which they deduced that the dismemberment took place when they were lifeless. The cutting marks on the bones were irregular, as if an axe or hammer had been applied to separate them, while the joints had feathers of having been cut with a knife. The remains had little skin and the neck muscles were absent, the limbs, the heads, and the sexual organ. The teeth found belonged to at least 20 people, but eventually more than 40 were identified. They also located a large number of identification cards and documents of various people, as well as accounting books. They also found loose sheets of paper listing the names of 30 men and women. In front of each name was a date, probably of death. The record was chronological. The notes were detailed, usually with the date of birth and place of stay. The assumption that it was the list of victims was justified by the fact that the IDs were in Carl's room and none were located. From the appearance of the sheets, they assumed that the list wasn't made in one day. Among the records, they detail 122 dead, 107 naked, and 83 gutted. Among the tools used for the murders and the fragmentation of the bodies, the police found 3 axes, a saw for wood and one for trees, a pick and 3 knives, and other rusty utensils. On December 21st, 1924, a guard who went to haunt Carl's cell discovered that he had hanged himself with a rope, as he preferred to die rather than face public shame and rejection. This may tell us that we shall not trust everyone we know, because we never really know what's happening in their minds, their homes, and their lives.